Hello, this is Angela with Parker's Permaculture. I'm in the backyard of my Portland, Oregon permaculture garden in Zone 9A, and today I'm going to be planting my peppers and tomatoes, so I wanted to show you a little bit of how a permaculture annual veggie garden works, at least on my property here. I'm going to show you some before footage because these are my annual veggie beds right now. They're mostly not planted out. There are some perennial things in here like Good King Henry and chives and perennial Egyptian walking onions. There is also tree collards. There's some annual overwintered kales, but for the most part, it's just self-sown annual flowers, including radishes and poppies and calendula and nigella. And those are all here on purpose. Those are basically green mulch. They are kind of a cover crop in my garden. I used to intentionally plant cover crops and I no longer do. I just let the flowers self-sow. So I'm going to show you the process of how I get these beds ready to plant with annual veggies and how all of these plants are going to serve a purpose even after I rip them up to make room for peppers and tomatoes. You can see there's a big mix here. There's annual corn poppies, which I have not planted in 15 years. They self-sow. I don't do anything. They're an annual poppy. There's borage. These are radishes, which I think are a great self-sowing annual cover crop. Orange things are calendula. This is more annual poppies. I won't be ripping these out because I love them so much. There are a few plants in here that I don't necessarily want. So this is motherwort, and it's one of my favorite herbs, but it gets really big and it self-sows pretty vigorously. So I'm gonna rip this out. I have motherwort right here on purpose. So I don't want this one in this bed. So I'll pull that up. And then below it, you see all of this broadleaf plantain. I keep that in as a green living mulch. I think it's a great ground cover plant. It has medicinal uses, but mostly I just keep it in as a way to shade the soil and prevent water loss in the heat of summer. Okay, so over here, I tend to throw garlic back on the beds, and sometimes that comes back to bite me because the little root ends from the head of garlic will all volunteer. So this is basically volunteer garlic that should have gone elsewhere to be composted. Doesn't mean I can't pick and use the scapes. And actually, ideally, I could have divided this earlier and planted it around and gotten full heads of garlic, but it is what it is right now. So this is nigella, love in a mist. This is not the edible nigella. This was here when we moved in. It was one of the few wildflowers, cottage garden flowers in the garden. It self-sows everywhere. I love the ferny foliage. It's very delicate. I love how it moves in the breeze. It does self-sow really prolifically. So I end up pulling it up, but it comes up very, very easily. You can see I started pulling up some nigella here. So this is the edge of the bed. What I'm gonna do is clean up the center of the bed. I don't wanna get rid of all of these flowers because they shade the soil and they will help conserve water in the heat of the summer. But I do wanna make room so that my peppers and my tomatoes are not smothered by these plants, which are not mature yet. They will get bigger. So I wanna be generous with my yanking up of these and leave lots of space. But I leave some on the border, and then the veggies will get planted in the middle. I'm also going to be doing this bed today. You can see all of these volunteer radishes here. Such great early bee food. I think they're really pretty. I love how they sway in the breeze. They have delicate little flowers. And the pods, if I were to let them go all the way. So these radishes, if I let them go to seed, the pods are really good pickled or eaten in stir fry. I don't know why in American cuisine we don't really eat radish flowers or seed pods, but all parts of this plant are technically edible for humans and for poultry. So here in this bed, I'm going to be removing everything. This is one of the few kind of, straight line geometric beds that I have in the garden. Nothing about permaculture requires you to abandon straight lines. You do what's convenient for you. And this runs alongside the path here on the other side of the fence is the path down to the poultry houses. So this bed made sense to have it be straight. And right now it's got lots of radishes in it, some volunteer weeds like nipplewort, and I'm going to be removing those and putting tomatoes and then eventually pumpkins. My pumpkins won't go in for another week or two. There's also comfrey planted all along the fence. My poultry have been eating it down, and roses as well. And don't judge me, this grape, which I didn't prune super well, but has lots of little grapes set on it. Okay, so I think there can be this misconception that if you, bear with me, I think there can be this misconception that if you are growing veggies in a permaculture garden, annual veggies, that you have to mix them in with your perennials. Now, I do that a lot, and when my fruit trees were much younger, I did it much more. I would put my tomatoes underneath my little tiny stick of a plum tree because lots of sun came in. But most annual veggies require a lot of sun. And as my trees have matured in the food forest, there isn't really the ideal set of growing conditions for most annual veggies. So I have a sun trap here. This part of the garden, so right, the sun comes in from this way, from the front yard, comes in this way through the garden. And so I want to have tall things in the back and to the sides, and this area in the middle captures the sun. It makes it ideal for annual veggies. And while I still stick a tomato here and a pepper here, because I tend to grow a lot more things than I really have room for, and so I'm constantly cramming things in empty holes, especially like basil, I tend to put that all over the place. The majority of my annual veggies are grown in this part of the garden. It is an effective strategy for me. I have cattle panel arches to grow squash and runner beans, cattle panel arch here to grow squash and runner beans. And okay, I'm struggling with my tripod here a little bit. YOLO, I have it propped on a bucket on top of a wheelbarrow, so I'm doing the best I can. So I think folks, when they're new to permaculture, I've seen this repeatedly online, including groups where I'm an admin, permaculture groups. Folks can say, like, you can't have annual veggie gardens. Everything has to be this mixed polyculture, and you have to have everything based around perennials. And that's just not true. When we look at the zones in permaculture, zones 1, 2, and 3, it's perfectly acceptable to have those areas set aside for some kind of annual veggie cultivation, right? It could be your strawberry bed in your zone 1. It could be an annual veggie garden like this in your zone 2 and 3. You don't have to have everything be mixed with perennials. Now, I do have some perennial veggies in here, but they're all kind of under the auspices of veggie garden. And as I've said in a number of my videos, we don't want to have a purity fallacy. We don't want to have some kind of zealotry in permaculture where we judge other people for not being like permaculture-y enough in their garden design. And also understand that permaculture is site-specific design, and everybody's garden is going to look different. Everybody wants to eat different foods. Everybody has different climatic conditions. Everybody has different amounts of labor and time that they can give to their garden. And that means permaculture gardens are going to look really different, and annual veggie gardens are going to look really different depending on the needs of the gardener and the situations of the site. Okay, so I'm gonna put this on time lapse, I think, and get this all yanked up and ready to plant. Okay, here's the after. You can see that I've left a few garlics that I'll probably use for green garlic for stir fries. I've pulled up a pile of radishes that will go to the chickens. I have some in there right now that they're gonna work through. Oop, I think they're starting to discover that it's there. One of the ducks has discovered it. Then this pile that's radishes and nipplewort. This is a very satisfying weed to pull, by the way. It comes up super easy. And a bunch of other flowers in here. Those I will chop up with the edge of my shovel, and I will plant them around the base of my tomatoes, which I will show you in another video. But basically this bed is ready to have half a dozen tomatoes in it. And then later along the edge here, it will get pumpkins. Okay, that one bed behind me is now fully weeded and ready to put tomatoes in. No peppers are going in that bed because it's going to be underplanted with winter squash, which will get too tall and shade the peppers, which are smaller than pumpkins. I had a couple of thoughts, but they went right out of my head. So yeah, it just took a few short minutes because the soil is not compacted, because I've been working on building biomass there. It's pretty loose and loamy, and it's easy to dig most things up except for volunteer garlic, for which I need the shovel. Now, as I'm going through the bed, if there are small starts of radish or calendula, I leave those in. Those will grow up after I plant the tomatoes. The tomatoes will go in and they're about this big, and then the calendula and smaller radishes and things like that I leave in there. And then they can grow up and shade the area. So I'm not totally stripping everything out. I'm just removing the large plants that are currently shading the area and taking up too much space. This method I have found is really helpful because before it's time to get the veggie garden going, I have a beautiful cottage flower garden. It looks gorgeous, lush. And all of these annual flowers self-sow easily, very little maintenance for me. Like zero maintenance. And you may say like, oh, Angela, you have the work of weeding and pulling them all up, but I'm not actually viewing that as work because that is an additional yield. I get multiple benefits from having this system of having annual flowers proliferate in my veggie garden. The first one is that things like the nigella and like the calendula come up early and kind of get ahead of the weeds. And so even though I have these beds that initially had bare soil with wood chips on top, which does smother some of the weeds, it doesn't get everything. These guys come in, they get a leg up on all of the annual weeds that I don't want. And then before it's time to have annual veggies growing, I have this beautiful cottage garden, flower garden in this part of the yard, so that it's not just like bare mulched beds. I'm getting a yield, a visual yield, and I'm getting a yield of providing food for pollinators. But then when I need to remove them to plant my annual veggies, what I have is a ton of free mulch, free green mulch, free chop and drop or pluck and drop, so that when I plant my tomato in, it is immediately circled by mulch that will further suppress weeds and shade and cool the soil and conserve water. And then I get the yield of those little guys that were being shaded by the first annual flowers to come up. They now are exposed to the sun, they love the sun, and they're gonna fill in those gaps around my tomatoes and further shade the soil, further provide a benefit of being a living mulch that conserves water and protects the soil. So I'm super pleased with this system. It's also really lazy, y'all. It's really, really lazy and easy. You get this really lush, verdant, abundant look in your garden, and you have to do basically nothing except 10 or 20, depending on how big your garden is, maybe 30 minutes of plucking these plants and throwing them on the bed when it comes time to actually plant your annual veggies. I want to make sure that I don't pull up everything. Again, I want some of them to get big and live and be living mulch, but I also want to make sure I have enough of them that are able to go to seed and self-sow to continue the cycle year after year, so that my annual flowers become functionally perennial. I'll probably save the planting of the tomatoes for a different video. One of my neighbors has been burning like noxious stuff for 5 days in a row, and it's really been hurting my eyes and my lungs. So I'm going to finish up here and then go in for a little bit and hopefully come back out when he's not burning garbage or whatever the heck he's burning. It's illegal to burn that stuff in Portland, by the way. So thanks for watching. If you have thoughts about how you work an annual veggie garden into your permaculture design, I would love to hear about it. I'd love to hear how that works for you. Please don't forget to click like and subscribe. That is a great way you can support the work of this channel. Don't forget, I have a GoFundMe down at the beginning of the video description for Selwa and her family. Thanks. Okay, obviously things don't need to be perfectly cleaned up. I'm preserving this borage. I'm preserving this poppy, which I will push back up after I plant other things in here. This bed, you can see here, I leave some of the calendula, and then I'm leaving things around the edge. I've got room in here for 2 tomatoes and a couple of peppers. Here's my giant heap of mulch. One of 3, I should say, giant heaps of mulch. This bed's just about ready. I saved a volunteer Swiss chard. There is nasturtium, that orange flowering plant there, calendula, more nasturtium here. Oh, look, I forgot a nipplewort. These are so satisfying. They come up so easy. And then I'll loosen the soil and give it a good drink, and I'll show you in a future video how I plant the tomatoes here. This bed over here has had everything cleared out of it under my Jude the Obscure rose, which the heavy rain knocked down the other day. And I'll have summer squash growing under that later. Another pile. So it looks a bit of a mess, but I'm ready to plant tomatoes, peppers, and my chickens are ready to lay eggs. And you can see I've got my tomato cages out, and I'm ready to get those planted and start thinking about clearing space for beans and summer squash and winter squash as well.